Okay, so today I'm going to talk about what I think is a truly great poem by Du Fu. And you might ask yourself, well, aren't all of Du Fu's poems great? Well, I wouldn't actually say so. And even though he's the perhaps the greatest poet in the Chinese tradition, we're not absolutely not obliged to admire every single character he has written. But this one is a truly great performance. And when I'm doing this series, I'm not choosing exclusively to cover only his truly great poems. Far from it, actually. I choose them based on a variety of factors. They may be interesting for historical reasons, for formal reasons, vocabulary reasons, other stuff. But this one is really truly great from purely poetical reasons. And if I was to apply only that criterion of quality, I would jump probably directly from the first one I did, the Wang Yue poem, and then go directly to this one, because this is really in a class of its own. Well, it's not in a class of its own, because there will be many of the like quality further down the road, but talking about the poems from Du Fu's earlier period, it really does stand out. And as you can see, one is called the行次昭陵, reaching Zhaoling on my travels. So Zhaoling, you might not be aware, that is the grave of Emperor Taizong. So Taizong, as you know, was, or perhaps don't know, was the second emperor of the Tang dynasty, but he can also be considered to be basically the dynastic founder in a way. So this is his grave, Zhaoling, and as such it's a holy site. It's a holy site in the sort of imperial ancestral cult, and thereby holy site for the inhabitants of the empire. And this poem has in common with the last poem I did, which was also a poem about a visit to a temple, a holy place. But this is whereas that poem was a little bit heavy-handed, and even though I think is a very good poem and very interesting, it had this poetic defect of having a little bit too obscure vocabulary, I think. Whereas this one is just, it uses words in a simple, direct, and extraordinary powerful manner, which is really something that not many people could do. So the background to this is obviously that China is really here at the cusp of the breakout of the An Lushan rebellion. And Du Fu, being a perceptive and intelligent person, he could see that the empire was in a high-risk situation. And the Tang dynasty by this point had been established for almost 150 years, so it was in a way quite an old empire, and it had seen its fair share of problems, and it was not, in one sense, it was at its apogee, at its apex, but also signs of decline were showing here and there, everywhere actually, for people of discernment. And here Du Fu looks back to the first emperor of the Tang dynasty and his mighty deeds, basically. So I should perhaps just start describing a little bit who Taizong was, and why he matters so much to the history of the Tang dynasty and Chinese history in general. So Taizong, his name was Li Shimin, and he was the son of a general, or well, actually he wasn't the son of a general. He was the son of a governor of basically what is now Shanxi province. Sorry, I got a bit distracted there. You have to apologize. He was the son of a man called Li Yuan, who rebelled against the Sui dynasty. So the Sui dynasty was the first dynasty in about 400 years that had actually managed to unify the whole territory of China, and his father, Taizong's father, rebelled against the Sui dynasty, which he wasn't at all alone in doing. So there was a sort of general breakout of rebellion that ended the whole Sui dynasty, and in these wars that ensued and which went on for about 15 years or so, the Li clan, led by Li Yuan and his son Li Shimi, emerged victorious, basically. And the interesting thing here isn't just that, is that Li Yuan, the father of Taizong, and who later became the first emperor of the Tang dynasty, that under the posthumous name of Gaozu, he was actually encouraged by his son to rebel. So, and the future emperor Taizong, who this poem is about, he was at that point only 19. So he was he's a real genius personality. That's the kind of impression you get from reading about him, and a very powerful person, a person of extraordinary personal genius and charisma. And he later became really one of the truly great emperors of China. And when he was actually the second son of his father, so he wasn't really sort of destined for the throne, but since it had been basically his contributions that really pushed his father to the top of the whole hierarchy in China and to the throne of emperor. He became sort of the natural choice that many people flocked around at court and so on, and this led to conflicts with his two other brothers. And the whole thing ended with the kind of tragedy that has been playing and replaying itself so often in China's history, with mergers in the imperial clan. So he killed both of his brothers, and which basically scared his father into abdicating as well. But after that, he really ruled in his own right for 23 years, and this was really a golden era in Chinese history. This led the groundwork for the Tang dynasty. So he's often considered, for this reason, to be really as much of a dynastic founder as his father, even though, as I said, he's technically the second emperor of the Tang. And Zhaoling, this tomb, is on the outskirts of Chang'an, and it still exists. Well, it exists under this huge mound of earth, which you can still see in at this location outside of Xi'an. And yeah, that is the place where Dufu is at right now. So let's start looking at the poem. I hope that serves enough as introduction. 旧俗皮庸主，群雄问独夫. So this olden ways were done by undistinguished rulers. So Yongzhu, of course, is what means undistinguished rulers or incompetent rulers. Dufu was probably of the opinion that was current in his own time, that the Tang dynasty were the restorers of the legitimate empire of the Han dynasty. So all the intervening 4 centuries, basically from around 200 CE until 600 CE, were then Yongzhu, incompetent, undistinguished rulers. And of course, so the olden ways, 旧俗. Yeah, does this here? It sounds like olden ways were worn down, as if there were the good old ways had been worn down by undistinguished rulers. It might also, I understand it as the ways of the past. They were already in a state of exhaustion, basically, because of the that is actually the same meaning. So, and the end of the Sui dynasty, the last emperor of the Sui dynasty which is what this Du Fu, the lone man, refers to, was called Emperor Yang, and he's really he's one of China's legendary bad emperors. Uh, he was actually not a bad emperor in the sense that he just sat on his back and was a useless person, but he was had the traits of a tyrant, you might say. He accomplished a lot of things. He completed the Grand Canal, that goes basically from Beijing to Hangzhou, and he restored the Great War. He fought wars in Vietnam and Korea, and he had a lot of people killed doing these things. So it's estimated that like 6 million people died just restoring the Great Wall in this time. So that was basically why people rebelled against the Sui dynasty, and that is how the Tang dynasty came to power. So Qun Xiong are all really refers to this chaos of rebellion and all the various leaders that really sort of jockeyed for power. There were people like Li Mi, Dou Jiande, like generals. There were all these what they called agrarian rebels, and there were people like Li Yuan, who had been like governors under the Sui dynasty, and they were all sort of motivated by their own grievances against the Sui dynasty, you might say. So that's what they win. So called to account. Yes, that's exactly what it means. And the Du Fu is also quite an interesting piece of vocabulary. This occurs in the Shu Jing, and there it's talked of the Du Fu Zhou, the last king of the Shang dynasty. An emperor that has lost the mandate of heaven and is no longer fit for rule. He's reduced to being just a simple person. Mencius says in one place, yes, the lone man Zhou was killed. No emperor was deposed. No emperor was murdered when the Zhou took over from the Shang dynasty, basically. Yeah. So that's what this Du Fu. That's the background for this piece of vocabulary. Let's go on. 10 归龙凤至, 威定虎狼都. So 10 prophecies. Yeah, I think this word more specifically refers to sort of the physical piece of paper or writing that a prophecy is written on, but that's details. So the prophecies point to one of dragon and phoenix nature. A man with the qualities of dragon and phoenix, that's basically a superior human being, and of course this refers to Taizong, because we are at the tomb of Taizong here. This is basically the idea of the Tianming, of the mandate of heaven. That the heaven favors the person with the highest virtue. And Wei Ding Hu Lang Du, his might settled the capital with the tigers and jackals. When his father rebelled, Taizong was created by his father to be the Prince of Qin. That is the area around Chang'an and the Guanzhong region. And this area, of course, in early days, it had a reputation for being a sort of semi-barbaric country. And even if it wasn't at this point, this was the moniker this moniker sort of stuck around, and that is what Hu Lang Du refers to, the capital with its tigers and jackals. Is this his might settled? His might was settle the capital with its tigers and jackals. Tigers and jackals, the capital of tigers and jackals. That's where his power first settled into place and started expanding. 天属尊尧典，神功写雨墨. I mean, just look at this. This is just so wonderful. I love this couplet. 天属 is blood relations. Yeah, 天属 is like not just blood relations. It's like a heavenly connection. Things that belong together by virtue of their nature. Here it means blood relations. It does mean. It means the relation between father and son. So the relation between Taizong and his father, because And the reference here, of course, to Yao Dian is to the legendary Emperor Yao, who was said to have abdicated to Shun, which is what Gaozu did to Taizong, even though, as I said, Gaozu was basically scared into doing it. So how much that points to Taizong's virtue is a separate story. But I mean, Du Fu was a loyal subject, and he really admired, of course, the dynastic founder. So there's no controversy here. And actually, Gaozu, he also received the posthumous name of Shen Yao. That is the divine Yao for this. And Shen Gong Xie Yu Mo, Yu Mo, the plan of Yu. Yeah, so Yu, it's the third of these great mythical emperors. First Yao, Shun, and then Yu. And Yu, of course, he tamed the waters. He was the tamer of the great flood in Chinese mythology. And he was also a dynastic founder, the founder of the Xia. So his achievement was indeed divine. And so Taizong's achievement can be put on a parallel plane with the great Yu's achievement. And both Yao Dian and Yu Mo, they are chapters in the Shangshu, that is the Shujing, the Book of Documents, one of the Confucian classics. So here Du Fu really reaches back into the scriptural canon and establishes Taizong as a figure of mythological magnitude and really heavenly virtue, which is extraordinary. It's just extraordinary, this kind of writing. I mean, you can't say anything about it. Let's go on. 风云随觉祖，日月继高渠。风云, when the clouds follow, the fleetest feet. Yeah, 觉祖 is translated here as the fleetest feet, correctly. I think here, as I understand it, wind and clouds are conceived as something that is born in the wake of a powerful creature's movements. So these 觉祖, that would be the fleetest feet is the feet of the horse of Taizong. And Feng Yun are perhaps the people which follow his virtues of themselves as a matter of course, as a matter of their nature. There are this idea that Feng Yun as things that in the I Ching, there's a place where it says Yun Cong Long, Feng Cong Hu. That is, clouds follow a dragon and wind follows a tiger. So it refers a little bit back to this Long Feng Zhi, a man of the qualities of dragon and phoenix. And 日月继高渠. Gao Qu, the highest way, the high streets of heaven. Yes, you can understand this is, of course, this is symbolical. Sun and moon. When the sun and moon follow the highest way, then that is a symbol of ultimate order in the universe, which is brought on then by the virtue of the ruler. Because this was really the belief of Chinese. This was the Chinese worldview at this time. At the traditional Chinese worldview is that the rulers of the empire, they had a sort of mandate over the entire universe. Their actions had effects on all planets and stars and the natural world, and their virtue or lack of virtue contributed to the general state of well-being in the universe. 文物多尸骨，朝廷半老儒. In cultural matters, that's 文物, whereas patterns and objects. So that this would be then specifically ornaments and objects prescribed by ritual observance in a more general sense. 文物, of course, nowadays means just cultural objects, but here 文物 is to be understood as as sort of the forms and manners of Taizong's court, if we understand it in a broad sense. 多师古 often followed antiquity. Yes, of course, gu is antiquity. Actually, gu, this little character is, I think it's not exactly misunderstood, but I think it doesn't just mean what was before, as in antiquity as a place, sort of a chronological designation, because it frequently corresponds more to the associations that we get from the word eternal. Eternal things are of course old as well, so there's an overlap here, but eternal things are also always actual. They also always have an actuality here and now, and that is the same with this gu. When it says shi gu, are the things established really early, but which have a universal and eternal validity. So shi gu has this shi gu following antiquity in the Chinese literature. This really has an air of eternal truth. It's not just being conservative. It's being, again, in harmony with the universe. 朝廷办老儒. Yeah, this language-wise, there's not much to comment on here. Taizong did indeed sponsor many men of learning. He set up academies for scholarly study, and he surrounded himself with learned men generally. So this couplet basically refers to the arts of peace of Taizong. 只此宁路汝，贤路不崎岖. So 只此, criticize directly, like straight words is what it means literally. Yeah. So Taizong, he was famous for inviting criticism of his policies from his ministers, and this is of course imagined here as a contrast to the many so-called bad rulers who we must take to have preceded Taizong, because only a man with such a temper, who invites and welcomes criticism, only such a man is actually capable of gathering men of true discerning to his side. Because if the ruler prefers lies, well, liars and fools will flock to him. That's really an eternal truth. So ning luru, ning, this word really is like saying in modern Chinese 怎么, like 知此怎么会路辱路辱 like shame or kill. How would he ever shame or kill someone for speaking straight words? No, instead, the road for the virtuous was not hard going. Yes, exactly. Qi chu, uneven, hard going. Originally, of course, this refers to mountain paths. I'm surely, I am not the only one here who detects a note of criticism here in this couplet, a criticism of Du Fu's own times, of course. I mean, because it's well known that the emperor of this time, Xuanzong, he was at this point sliding sort of more and more into a really irresponsible dependence on quite unworthy men, and as we know, disaster was just around the corner. So there is really criticism of his own times in this couplet. 王者哉有将，苍生产未苏. This 王者, in all likelihood, this refers to sort of the time after Taizong's elevation, because at this point, even though the internal wars had been won, the empire was still plagued by other disasters like drought, and this is what it refers to. The disasters still descended from heaven, then obviously, and the gasps of Wei Su were not yet relieved. Yeah, relieved or healed. This is what Su means, of course. Cang Sheng is the common folk. Yeah. And these two lines together with the next two lines, they have caused a little bit controversy actually in the dating of this poem, because some have said that it refers to this Wang Zhe Zai You Jiang and so forth, that it refers to the breakout of the Anlushan rebellion, and the people who say that then take this poem to have been written after the Anlushan rebellion started. And so there's a little bit of controversy about that, but I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of start talking about that in context with what came before, because he's really talking about Taizong and not talking about his own era here, which becomes apparent afterwards. So I think the people who have made this association, they probably have too much of Anlushan rebellion on their minds, and they basically just misunderstood what this is about. At least that's my interpretation here. Not just mine interpretation. 指挥安帅土，荡地赴鸿胪. Another one of these just magnificent couplets. How can you not love a poem like this? 指挥, yes, his directions, his pointing of battle flags, his directions were settled all the land. 安帅土, 帅土 means all of the earth, all of the land. It's a quite old-fashioned piece of vocabulary. And then we have 荡地赴鸿胪, he soothed the vast forge. 鸿胪, the great forge. This is an ancient metaphor for heaven and earth, and we have it attested in the Zhuangzi. And vast forge. Why is heaven and earth a vast forge? Well, it's an alchemical metaphor. It emphasizes the world as a place where things are transformed through mystical combinations. So it's a wonderful, not entirely unfrequent actually, reference to heaven and earth. And Dangdi is also extremely powerful. This is an extremely potent piece of vocabulary. It's like shaking out and purifying with water. So Taizong's military might possessed a purifying virtue. Wonderful couplet. Really wonderful couplet. Then we go on. 壮士悲灵异，幽人拜鼎湖. The bold man is saddened at his tomb mound. I think 灵异 doesn't actually mean tomb mound specifically. Yi is a settled place. It's not a mound. It means basically a little city or a little town or any little village or anything like that. And there was this practice in ancient times of establishing a small settlement in connection with an imperial grave complex to house the caretakers of the grave with their families and so forth. And it's interesting to imagine what it must have been like in that place, because it seems to have been a fairly open place, this grave complex, like a park perhaps. But it was also a holy site, so probably it had a sort of sealed off inner enclosure. But it had this tomb settlement, something like that. So 壮士, it might refer to the people guarding the most probable explanation is that 壮士 here refers to the guardians of the tomb complex. 幽人拜鼎湖, the recluse bows at Tripod Lake. Well, this probably refers to Du Fu himself. 幽人 is an ancient piece of vocabulary. It occurs in the I Ching, and it doesn't mean a recluse, someone who's a recluse by choice, but it's the opposite of someone that's famous and powerful. No? It carries the association of having superior moral character, like the Youlan, the secluded orchid that I talked about in the last video, or the association also of having been a victim of injustice. That is, it's someone who isn't famous and powerful, but who really doesn't deserve his obscurity or his lowly position. And in my edition, there's this interesting quotation here that were a couple of interesting quotations actually that mentioned that there was a Tang Dynasty institution, you might say, of allowing victims of injustice to privately come to exactly this tomb of Taizong to lament the wrongs done to them. Yeah. So perhaps the entire poem should be understood in this light, because we also had a note of criticism in another couplet before. 幽人拜鼎湖, this then could refer to Du Fu himself. Bows at Tripod Lake. What's Tripod Lake then? Ding Hu. This is the place where the mythical Yellow Emperor was said to have ascended to heaven, born by a dragon. Well, this is not the actual place where they are now, where Du Fu is now, Zhaoling, but it means, it has the same association. This is a form of supplication to the spirit of a sage ruler. So that's why it fits in the general context. We go on. 御衣陈自举，铁马汉长驱. Jade burial suit. 御衣, suit of jade. This is actually an extraordinarily lavish form of grave garment. It's an entire suit that was made of pieces of jade, and there was actually this was thought to have been merely legendary, that there was clothes like suits made of jade, until one was finally discovered in an ancient tomb in the 1960s, I think. But it's not entirely clear here if it's one of these actual jade suits that are intended here, or if it's just precious grave clothes in general. It might be one or the other, or both. This Chen Ziju, he ascends in the morning. It seems to refer to sort of observations of life still stirring in the old emperor, sightings of his spirit and the like, as if you could see him walking around in his jade burial suit in the morning. And then this couplet then is something like the same. It's this Tiema, armored horses. They were actually stone reliefs of Taizong's 6 favorite horses outside of the grave, and they here this is these horses, these sculptures that still seem to sweat with the exertion of carrying out Taizong's immense military schemes. So the whole couplet means that Taizong's spirit is still alive. Basically, that's what it refers to. And these horses, by the way, these horse sculptures, they are still extant. They exist at museums, both in China and in the US. And though they're damaged now, but they still exist 1,200 years later. That's an interesting detail here. 松柏占虚殿，陈沙立名图. Not much strange here. Cypress and pine, songbo, these are traditional trees for graves. You can see that, for example, if you go to the great mausoleums of the is it the Ming tombs? Yes, the Ming tombs in Beijing. They're all full of cypress and pine and these kinds of trees. I gaze on empty halls. Yeah, so he really introduces a note of desolation here, as if this grave complex is quite empty and lacking in the luster that it should have. And this becomes even more apparent in the final couplet, which ends the whole thing. 寂寥开国日，留恨满山隅. Du Fu. You can be such a wonderful poet. Vast distance. Well, I don't know about this translation actually. 寂寥properly describes the place, the desolation of the place. So he says desolate, and then he says 开国日, the day he founded the dynasty. You know, something interesting happens here because the syntax here is extremely abbreviated. It's as if it lacks a verb, doesn't it? It's like 寂寥怀念开国日 or something like that, or 寂寥开国日不复 something like that. It's like the emotion that he feels is so overwhelming that he has to cram more information into this couplet than it really can hold. It's something like that. That's the feeling you should get by reading this. And Liu Hen Man Shan Yu, yes, flowing resentment. Well, sorrow, really. Resentment sounds like such a lowly sentiment. Sorrow for the passing of a great dynasty. It just fills the whole scenery in his mind. Yeah. So basically, the Dufu, he celebrates and remembers and he reimagines the great days of the dynasty's founding, and he feels that the dynasty really has lost its way. That is the true meaning of this poem, and there are a few poems of this greatness, I would say, in the Chinese tradition. It's really quite an amazing achievement, and a statement of a world out of joint, and a longing and nostalgia for better days of virtue and days of bravery and true leadership, which was lacking in his own day. So that's it, folks. Thank you for listening, and bye bye.